When you're a child, you think family means forever. You believe that blood ties or shared homes or even the simple act of eating dinner together night after night is enough to bind people to you. I learned differently. I was 8 years old when my father remarried. My mother had died the year before in a car accident. One moment she was singing along to the radio, her hand reaching out to pat my knee. The next, there was screaming, glass, the sharp smell of gasoline, and then silence. They told me she didn't suffer. I don't know if that's true. I don't think I'll ever know. What I do know is that after she was gone, something inside my father cracked. He still did all the things a parent should. Drove me to school, packed my lunches, even remembered to tie my shoelaces when I forgot. But the light behind his eyes dimmed. We moved through life like actors in a play we didn't audition for. And then there was Margaret. She was my dad's new friend at first. Always smiling, always complimenting my hair, my dress, my drawings. She brought him coffee at his office, laughed at his tired jokes, and when she started showing up at the house on weekends, I knew something had changed. They got married 6 months later. It was a quiet ceremony. I wore a pale pink dress and held a bouquet that felt too big for my hands. I don't remember much from that day, except how tightly Margaret hugged my dad's arm and how she barely looked at me during the vows. From the outside, Margaret was the perfect wife. She cooked elaborate dinners, kept the house spotless, and made sure Dad never left the house without a pressed shirt and fresh coffee. But with me, things were different. It started subtly. A raised eyebrow when I asked for seconds at dinner. A sigh when I accidentally left my shoes by the front door. "Little ladies pick up after themselves, Ana," she'd say with a tight smile. At first, I tried harder. I folded my clothes neatly, brushed my hair twice a day, said please and thank you for everything. I thought if I just behaved better, maybe she'd like me. But it didn't matter. The warmth in her voice vanished when Dad wasn't around. She began to treat me like a guest in my own home. Someone tolerated, not loved. I'll never forget the night it all changed. I was 10. Dad had been called away on a business trip, something about a last-minute meeting in Chicago. He hugged me goodbye, promised to call, and left early in the morning. Margaret was quiet all day. By evening, I was curled up on the couch reading a book when she appeared in the doorway. "Come here," she said. I followed her into the kitchen. On the table was a small suitcase. My suitcase. My stomach dropped. "What's this?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "You're going to stay with a friend of mine for a little while." "Why?" "Because this isn't working, Ana." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't understand." "You're not mine," she said, her voice ice. "You don't belong in this family. You're just a reminder of what came before, and I'm tired of pretending." My breath caught. "But, Dad!" "Your father will understand," she snapped. "He'll thank me eventually." She handed me the suitcase and motioned toward the door. That night, I was dropped off at a woman's house I'd never met. Her name was Carla. She had kind eyes but a distant smile. Margaret told her I needed discipline and that she could keep me until Dad returned. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for my father to call, for someone to say it was all a misunderstanding, that I could come home. But no one did. Days turned into weeks. Carla wasn't unkind, but she wasn't affectionate either. She fed me, made sure I did my homework, and sent me to bed early. She never asked questions, never offered hugs. It was like being in a waiting room with no appointment scheduled. When Dad finally came home, it wasn't to bring me back. Margaret had told him I wanted to stay with Carla, that I had asked to leave, that I was going through a phase. I found out much later that she had told him I'd become rebellious and rude, that I was acting out, that she was only trying to help, and he believed her. Because believing me would mean admitting he'd married someone who saw me as disposable. So I stayed. For a year. At 13, I was sent to a boarding school. Margaret called it an opportunity for structure. I called it exile. At 15, I stopped writing home. The letters I did send were never answered. The phone calls became fewer. Eventually, I stopped trying. By the time I turned 18, I was legally free. I found a job at a small bookstore near campus and rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. It was the first place I ever felt safe, not because someone loved me, but because no one was there to send me away. My 20s passed like a slow, steady march forward. I didn't have much, but I had my independence. I worked days at the bookstore and studied at night. Eventually, I earned a degree in communications, not because I dreamed of being in the spotlight, but because I wanted to understand people, their words, their silence. I lived quietly. No big parties, no loud declarations. I built a small life brick by brick, held together with hard work and habit. Sometimes when I walked home at night, I would pass families at dinner, children laughing, parents shouting reminders from the kitchen, and I'd feel something twist in my chest. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself I didn't miss anything, that I was better off. But the ache was always there, low, lingering. At 27, I got hired by a nonprofit that worked with foster youth and runaways. I coordinated mentorship programs, helped with events, and organized workshops on financial literacy and self-advocacy. It was more than a job. It was a way to make sense of what I'd lived through. Because the kids I worked with, they weren't just statistics, they were me. Some had been abandoned, others neglected. Many bounced from home to home, never feeling like they truly belonged anywhere. When they told me their stories, I listened with more than my ears. I listened with the part of me that had once been dropped off like luggage, that had waited by a phone that never rang. And every time I told them, "You matter," I meant it like a vow. One Saturday afternoon, I was volunteering at a youth conference, helping a nervous 16-year-old girl with her presentation when someone said my name. "Excuse me, Ana?" I turned, and there she was, Margaret. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver. Her face was thinner, eyes shadowed. She wore a crisp blazer, still polished, but there was something brittle about her, like glass with a hidden crack. I froze. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't think. "Ana," she said again softly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I work here," I said, voice cool. She blinked, caught off guard by my tone. "You look well," she offered. I nodded. "I am." We stood in silence. Around us, teenagers laughed and music played, but between us, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She finally said, "I was hoping we could talk." "Talk?" I repeated flatly. She looked down at her hands. "There are things I need to say, things I should have said a long time ago." I studied her. The slight shake in her fingers, the tightness in her jaw. This wasn't the same woman who once told me I didn't belong. She looked older, tired. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. "There's a coffee shop across the street," I said after a pause. "We can sit for 15 minutes. She exhaled, almost in relief. "Thank you." We walked in silence. My mind raced the whole way. The last time I sat across from her, I was 10 years old, confused and heartbroken. Now, I was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes she left behind. And she was the one asking for a seat at the table. The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and something toasted. We chose a small table in the corner near the window. I sat down stiffly. Margaret ordered 2 cups of tea without asking what I wanted. Old habits, I guess. When she returned, she sat carefully, like she wasn't sure if the chair would hold her. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to talk," she said. I stayed quiet. She cupped the mug in her hands like it might anchor her. "I owe you an apology, a real one." I blinked. "That's a start?" Her shoulders sank. "I was cruel to you. I know that. At the time, I told myself I was doing what was best for the family, that your father needed space, that I couldn't raise someone else's child while I was trying to build something new." I stared at her. "So you threw me away?" She flinched. "You didn't just send me to stay with a friend, Margaret. You abandoned me. You took a grieving child and made her feel like garbage." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know, I do, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it." "Do you?" I asked. "Because you never called, never visited, never asked me how I was doing." "I was ashamed," she whispered. "That's convenient." She nodded, wiping her cheek. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I failed you. I failed your father. I failed myself." I leaned back, heart pounding. "What happened to him?" I asked quietly. She swallowed. "He passed 3 years ago, cancer." A sharp pain spread through my chest. I had wondered. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. I'd wanted to reach out so many times, but never did. Part of me hoped he would, but he never did either. "Did he know?" I asked. "What you did? How long you kept me away?" She nodded slowly. "Eventually. But by then, you had stopped writing. You didn't answer his letters." I looked at her sharply. "I never got any letters." She blinked. "What?" "You said I didn't want to come back. You told him I asked to leave." Her face paled. "No, I never told him that." I stared at her. Suddenly, so many pieces clicked into place. The silence, the distance, the absence that wasn't entirely mine. "You told him I didn't want him." She buried her face in her hands. "I thought it would be easier for both of you. I thought, if he believed you were happy, he wouldn't feel guilty." I stood up. "I waited for him, Margaret. Every birthday, every school play, every hospital visit when I got the flu so bad I couldn't stand. I waited. Tears streamed down her face. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I looked down at her, this woman who once held all the power, now just a shadow of herself, and I felt tired. Not angry, not vindicated, just tired. I sat back down. I don't hate you, I said softly. She looked up, startled. But I don't know if I can ever forgive you. She nodded. I understand. We sat in silence for a while. The tea grew cold. Finally, I said, I work with kids now. Ones like me, ones who've been discarded. She gave a small, sad smile. That makes sense. I tell them their story doesn't end with rejection, I continued, that what happened to them doesn't define them. Her eyes met mine. Then you've become the kind of woman I never deserved to raise. I didn't answer, because she was right. Margaret and I parted ways quietly that day. No promises, no warm hugs, just a nod of understanding and the kind of silence that comes after a storm. I didn't give her my number. I didn't ask for hers. I wasn't sure if we'd ever speak again. And strangely, I was okay with that. Some wounds don't close with conversation. Some don't need to. Sometimes it's enough to look someone in the eye and finally say, I see what you did and I won't carry it anymore. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at the nonprofit where I worked. It was from Margaret. She thanked me for meeting her, said she didn't expect anything, but that speaking with me gave her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. She included a photograph of my father, one I'd never seen before. He was sitting on a park bench holding a book, smiling faintly at the camera. His hair was grayer, his shoulders narrower, but his eyes were the same. On the back, she had written, he carried your photo in his wallet until the day he died. I cried when I read that. Not just for the years we lost, but for the truth I never got to hear from his lips. Still, it helped. Grief doesn't leave you, it just becomes quieter. It settles into your bones like the echo of a song you once knew by heart. Over the next few years, I stayed rooted in my purpose. I launched a new initiative at the nonprofit, Legacy Circles, a mentorship program pairing adults who grew up in foster care with teenagers navigating the same path. The first group had just 6 pairs. Within a year, we had over 50. And counting. I also started writing. Small essays at first. Stories about abandonment, healing, rebuilding. Then came a book deal. The manuscript was titled Left Behind, Still Standing. I didn't write Margaret's name, or my father's, or Carla's, but their shadows were in every chapter. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. I spoke at conferences, classrooms, churches. People asked if I ever reconnected with the woman who abandoned me. I always answered honestly. I saw her again, I'd say. We spoke, she apologized, and I let go. They'd nod. Sometimes letting go isn't about the other person. It's about yourself. It's about releasing the anger, the grief, the desire for things to be different. It's about choosing peace. Now at 38, I live in a small cottage near the coast. There's a tree outside my window that blooms pink every spring. I drink tea every morning and watch the sun rise over the water. I still mentor. I still write. I still remember. But I am no longer defined by being left behind. I am defined by what I built from the silence, by every child I've helped stand back up, by every person who heard my story and whispered, me too. I keep that photo of my father on my bookshelf. Some nights I hold it and smile. Not because everything was okay, but because I found a way to be okay anyway. My name is Ana Patricia Botín. I was abandoned, but I didn't stay lost. And that, to me, is the real ending.